a spotlight looking at insights on VC and private equity funding and crowdfunding. And at this point, allowed me to invite Vuyisa Kabaka from HYBR Group, Southern Africa, to give us the 10-minute presentation. As he comes through, I'd also like to indicate that he will be part of the discussion that will come up looking at fundraising for startup companies. And therefore, if you have any questions after his presentation and his participation in the panel discussion, you will be able to ask him after the panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome Vuyisa. Let's give him a hand.
Good morning, everybody. I just need to get settled here quickly before I start and as people start walking in. Okay, I think we're good. We can start the timer. 10 minutes is never enough for this particular type of talk because money is an important subject to talk about. So 10 minutes is never quite sufficiently enough time. But let me do my best to kind of give a background picture around what the funding landscape is for everybody in South Africa. And as I've been introduced, my name is Vuyisa Kabaka. I come from a company called Hybra Group, short for Hybrid Innovation. We have a business that's located in 3 countries across the continent. So we are a Pan-African innovation advisory firm, and we've done our work in multiple countries across the continent. But I'm also, in my own private personal capacity, a bit of an angel investor, and I've invested in 7 companies in South Africa, and I continue to work with startups in South Africa. And again, it's not my first rodeo in this space. I've been quite actively involved over the past 9 years in different areas, including being a columnist for the Business Report in South Africa, but also contributing to a number of research studies and insights into the space. I'm also kind of around the world. As much as you might not know this, South Africa has representation in multiple global initiatives around angel investing. And I've certainly spent my fair share of time giving inputs from not only a South African perspective, but an African perspective in this particular space. And ourselves as Hybra Group, we really look to support high growth impact companies. We particularly are interested in 8 key verticals, including the biospace, as well as other spaces that again impact people's lives on the continent. In fact, our vision is to, over the course of the next 10 years, support 100 SMMEs in Africa to scale the solutions across the continent. But the disclaimer or the condition that we will do it under is that they need to impact over 100 million people's lives on the continent. So the ideas need to be scalable to that extent, and they need to be generating in excess of $100 million individually for business. So we think that there are many good ideas in the continent that are relevant and that can scale to the rest of the world. But what we came here today is to really talk about the funding landscape. And I've got good news for everybody. The good news is that it's boom time in the VC investment space and the funding space in Africa. It's an exciting particular time. In fact, depending on whose statistics you read or you follow, the current estimation of the VC landscape is in excess of last year alone, over $725 million was raised by early stage companies and scale-ups across the continent. So not only this, but the African Business Angels Network is now tracking in excess of 80 new angel hubs across the continent. So really, the expansion of the space is growing. We also now know that in South Africa, we've had some pretty exciting things happen. I've shared with you some of the key highlights. Like Mark Shuttleworth, it really started with him, with his company Thought, when he exited to VeriSign for in excess of $445 million at the time. Woo Themes, Get Smarter, and the one that's probably that's missing there is Kappa Biosystems, which was exited in 2015 to Roche for an estimated $445 million. So the context of this is that there is money in the space. But again, as I begin the talk, at the latter part of the talk, I'm going to kind of bring some realism around how difficult it is to actually raise the capital. But at least let's for now unpack the landscape. So in effect, we can look at a number of ways that early stage companies can get capital or funded in South Africa. And the ones that I've kind of highlighted there, depending on what level of funding you're seeking, you can kind of find your way and identify where you best fit. And my advice is try to be pragmatic around the approach around where your fit goes. Some of the key highlights I'd want to make are things like FinFind. So again, with USID and the government of South Africa, a whole platform exists where you can basically, through a self-tested model, effectively see who would be the right fit for the type of funding that you want. And in that kind of context, it's important that you realize that, in fact, the best place to find funding is customers. So just something as a tip when you're looking for early stage funding. Then obviously the Technology Innovation Agency, I think there's probably some members of TIA here attending this conference. Hopefully you'll meet them, or you've already met them during the course of the interactions, and I'm sure the SANBio team can also make some introductions for you to meet the Technology Innovation Agency. And I've also highlighted Uprise Africa. That's a equity crowdfunding platform that I was very proud to be part of in co-founding. And in fact, as recently as yesterday, we made a public announcement yesterday for a crowdfunding raise, an equity raise for an early stage company of 28 million rand, which was done in about 20 days. So it's a company called Integrate Me. And again, that money basically is in the bank. It's in the bank. It's legitimate. And there's now a few media statements that have gone out. So you simply need to Google search uprise.africa and then go through in the platform. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about how equity crowdfunding itself in South Africa works. And again, I'm glad to say that we are pioneers of equity crowdfunding in South Africa, in fact, advising government on how best to allow the space to grow in the country. And then if you're looking for the kind of higher kind of range of funding, which most of you probably will, the SANBio fund is looking for you. They primarily focused around 51% majority black-owned companies. Again, they're sector agnostic, and they're looking for opportunities to support early stage funding. They have a fund of about 1.2 billion rands available, and a new fund that's coming up that will probably be double that amount being released probably around September this year. So if you look out for the SANBio fund. For those of you who are truly driven and really want to take on the world, private equity is always a good option, and focusing your attention on IPO. We do IPOs in South Africa. We do a lot of them. There's 3 certified exchanges in the country. The JSE is just the one that I've highlighted. They've also got the Altex there. And ironically, it's not that hard to get onto the Altex. You just need to be generating in excess of 50 million upwards of turnover a year. And the actual cost of listing a company is no more than 3 million rand. So there are options if you're motivated, ambitious, and driven. And SAFCA is a great place to start your search. Certainly on the VC side, there's about 22 registered SAFCA members, and the majority of the members are in private equity. So go out and do your research there. So that's kind of the tips. We'll unpack some of the models and the approaches quickly so that we can move on to the panel. So most of you have heard of venture capital. So these are kind of the older models that you see in the space. Venture capital is very established in South Africa. Like I said, Mark Shuttleworth with his Here Be Dragons fund was a pioneer in the space. It's now grown. There's a number of funds available. The government recently released, or for the last 3 years, been supporting a tax incentive program called 12J VCC. So it's a section of the SARS Act. So again, there are a number of funds. There's over 100 already that you can approach that are looking for risk-based early stage investing. The DFIs, again, the likes of TIA, the likes of NYDA for the younger guys are there. Again, depending on which side of the fence you sit, I'm sure there's probably some CIFA representatives here as well. Depending on what you believe about our DFIs, I think they do the job as best as they can. But again, I know that there's a lot of skeptics about the effectiveness of DFIs in general, not only in South Africa, but across the continent. And naturally, private equity, very well established in South Africa and growing on the continent. So again, these are kind of the older models. The newer models include angel investing. Again, we are very much in the early stages of investing in the continent. Peer-to-peer investing and equity crowdfunding. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of those. Like I said earlier, the African Business Angels Network is there as a very kind of easy sector platform. I was fortunate enough to be a part of the founding team that set up the South African Business Angels Network. So again, these are the over 80 angel networks that are around the continent. So again, all you need to do is look at your country and find it, or go through to the African Angels Network and find a community of members. One thing to mention about angel investing itself is that it can also be done through a facilitated syndication model where different investors come together to one deal, to support one deal. So again, as long as you know what language to use, you can pretty much easily maneuver your way in getting people into your startup. The peer-to-peer space is growing as well. In South Africa, there's a platform called the People's Fund. If you go to the people.co.za, I'm an investor on this platform as well, so it's been amazing to see the amount of money raised in such a short space of time. It's been running for a little over a year, and again, we've supported a number of projects and initiatives to support as a collective, which effectively is a loan-based kind of model that we've started here. In terms of, there's my time, but I'll be quick, I promise. In terms of crowdfunding, again, similar kind of model. Uprise.Africa is there for you. Again, there's a bunch of investors and a bunch of individuals are doing deals. And on Uprise, you can invest for as little as 1,000 Rand, so even anyone can really invest. But like I said, we've done a number of amazing deals on the platform itself. So again, 14% of global funds raised now in venture capital is coming through crowdfunding. So again, it's an ever-growing space. We've done a very successful campaign. Again, by the time I sent this slide through, within the day later announced the integrate. So this particular slide was of a beer company that raised money through us. They raised R1 million in 48 hours. So R1 million in under 2 days. They were able to raise 3.9 million rands in 45 days. And this company now has just been voted as the best beer in Africa this year. So again, if you invested in this deal, you pretty much are smiling. And again, out of interest, 30% of the investors were black investors, people that probably would have never had access to this opportunity before. So we think that crowdfunding will open up the market and allow an inclusive and a diverse kind of community of investors. South Africa has a funding gap. It's about 346 billion large. So again, there is a gap in terms of what can be done and what can be funded. And again, for the entrepreneurs in the room, we all know the challenges that you face. So again, I'll make this a slide available to the SANBio team so that anyone who wants access to it can look at it. But in effect, it's important to focus on building globally scalable businesses and to make your way. And funding is not the only way that you can achieve that. And the reality of it, and I've enjoyed listening to some of the speakers yesterday, because the reality of it is that only 0.5% of startups actually scale across the world. So there's a 99.5% global failure rate of startups. And that's the reality. So if you really believe that you deserve to be funded, the question you need to ask yourself is why you need to be in the 0.5%. What qualifies you for that? So again, I'll rush through all of this, but this is some of the work that we do in the space. And we've also are setting up a program here in South Africa called the Ubuntu Accelerator, again, focusing on high growth black businesses, because we believe, like I said, that there is unique potential to scale and grow businesses across the country. Most startups in South Africa don't really scale even beyond their own province. So yet, when we sit in Gauteng, not only do you have access to 6 provinces around you within a 3-hour drive, you also have 4 countries that you can drive within 5 hours from where we're standing. So and most entrepreneurs need to open up their minds to that possibility and that opportunity. So again, if you are keen to support, come and chat to me afterwards. But it was Peter Diamandis who said, if you want to become a billionaire, help 1 billion people. So that's the message I leave you with as we move into the panel. So thank you very much. That's me. Thanks for everybody. Cool.
Thank you very much.
I tried to keep on trying.
Well, thank you very much, V.S. We're now going to move into a panel discussion, and at this point, I'd like to invite the members of the next panel to come through as I introduce our facilitator, who will focus on fundraising for startup companies. Now, Dr. Audrey Verheeg is the chairman of the South Africa Innovation Summit and its foundation to support and expand innovation outcomes in universities, government institutions, private sector garages and kitchens. The platform consists of various touch points such as the Pitching Den, the Inventors Garage competitions, the National Thought Leader Conference lead-up events, the March and Invest platform, the journal, and most exciting, the technology showcase. Audrey is the former CEO of Research Institute for Innovation and Sustainability, an innovation management consultancy focusing on cluster development, open innovation, and innovation ecosystem development in specific sectors. She holds a PhD from Da Vinci Institute. It is my honor and privilege to call upon Dr. Audrey Verhaeg. Let's give her a hand.
Can I call on my panel members to join us on the stage? Job. We've got Carmen. Who is here? Then we've got Aurora and Fanuel. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Fanuel? Cool. Is this the best visibility, or should we move there, but then we crowd this group? Can I move them there, because most of the audience sits there, and then you can look at me. Okay. You've got a mic in front of you, so if we're going to the panel, we've got the mic. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a really privilege to facilitate this panel. Managing the summit here in South Africa, also servicing the SADC space for 12 years, was a total changing experience. In the beginning years, the first year, 12 years ago, there was 2 VCs in South Africa. Last year, I think we reported 56 VCs, and I think they're growing day by day. I'm part of a Pan-African investors group. Vu is also part, maybe some of you are also on that group. It's a WhatsApp group, wonderful. About 79 investors on that group. And every week, almost every week, I hear of a new fund, and a new fund, and a new fund opening across Africa. So it's quite daunting to actually hear all of this money is coming in. I attended a conference in Mauritius last week for African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. And South Africa just became a member of that ACP network. Billions and billions of rands that the EU is saying, we can co-invest with you. So if you're running a VC, you can double your money through the Boost Africa program and new investment programs that's being launched across the continent of Africa. So this is a vibrant space. So something is happening. Something is happening. Then I talk to the investors. And the investors say to me, where's the pipeline? I say, there's millions of startups. No, we don't like them. I hear that. No? Who? Then I talk to the startups. And I say, where's the investors? Where's the money? They don't want to even listen to me. So there's a big disconnect here. What's happening? Still, something's happening. Because the money will not flow in if there's not pipeline. But there's a disconnect that I think most of us are aware of. So we're going to explore this. And where there's a disconnect, there's offer and there's a need, but they don't always come together. There are many reasons. It's always complex. It's not always linear. So I want to actually invite you as an audience to co-create this space with me. So you are from all over Africa. We do know that things are bubbling in Lagos and in Nigeria. We know things are bubbling in Kenya. We know it's going into Ghana, Rwanda. We hear touch points. We hear things about Mauritius. We hear all kinds of good stories. Jumia that exited, that Vu just said. Uprise Africa. Did you mention the biggest round?
Yeah.
Integrate, 24 million that just happened. and it happened in days. So things are bubbling, and we don't want to create a sense of we're missing out. So as an audience, I'm inviting you now to co-create this space with me. We've got an esteemed panel in front of us. These are all people who have dealt with investments. They've seen things fly. They've seen things fail. My own firm, the South African Innovation Summit, we're merging with a Pan-African Nigerian-held firm situated in Mauritius at the moment, so we're becoming Pan-African. So all of these things are happening, and I'm going to now ask each panel member to give us a very short 1 minute, 1.5 minute overview of who they are, show that you as an audience know they're busy with impact, they're busy with fintech, they're busy with commercial investment, so that you can know, because that's almost the biggest thing I've learned about investment, know with whom you're speaking. Okay, so as an audience, learn who you're speaking to. And then I'm going to ask this audience, or these experts, to tell us their opinion. What are the biggest obstacles about this disconnect that we're hearing about, but also maybe what they think is really happening, that's happening well, so the opportunities, the needs, and the things that we need to correct. I'm going to ask them to say that, each one of them. That gives us a little bit of a context, and then I'm going to hand over to the audience. I'm going to do this like this all the time, and give one or two of you a chance to talk to this disconnect. What do we need to do? What have you seen that failed? So first let's do that, then we'll go to solutions, and we can co-create this and think up work for all of us. What do we need to make this better? Let's start, Carmen. Can we start with you? Do you have a... And can you hear me clearly? Because I know I must be close to a mic and this is a little bit far.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Carmen from Lifeco Unlimited. And we have an interesting perspective because we work with entrepreneurs who are on the demand side. And we also invest in entrepreneurs, so we have an insight into the supply side of capital as well. So for the past 20 years, we've focused on very key objectives, and that is, from an entrepreneur perspective, we believe that we need to start as young as possible. So our focus has been very long-term, and a recognition that young people need to get the opportunity to be as entrepreneur-ready as possible. And there we give them the opportunity to build their critical thinking, work with capital, and to practice in the marketplace. Then we also work with entrepreneurs that are early stage, that are building solutions for society as well as the environment. And there we believe that those entrepreneurs need to be opportunity ready. And there are very key things that they need to put in place to ensure that they are. And as they go through the process and build enterprises that are more sustainable, we want to make sure that they're investment ready. And that's a key focus of what we do there. And that's interesting. We've learned a lot in terms of why we believe investors and entrepreneurs elude each other. And finally, we have a fund where we actively want to ensure that we can invest in high potential pre-growth stage enterprises.
Joop.
I'm one of Lifeco's biggest fans. Nice to meet you again. I'm Jaap Speelberg. I'm from Amsterdam. I manage, together with my team, the Hivos Food and Lifestyle Fund. We invest in South Africa, but also Zambia, Malawi, and Zimbabwe. So a little bit of risk-taking is not strange to us. We make small investment between 50,000 euros and $500,000, so that's about 750,000 rand and 7.5 million. So between the smaller investments and the bigger VC funds. And we like to invest in the best and brightest entrepreneurs that make businesses that really solve social problems. And when they scale, so in the core of what they're doing, they're really solving a really big problem. And we believe that when you solve it, like if you help 1 billion people, you can be a billionaire. So I really believe in the business case of social businesses. We made some investment here in South Africa, but also in Malawi. And if you're talking about a disconnect, if I talk with my European investor friends, they, of course, what are you doing in a country like Malawi? because you cannot make deals there. And then when I start explaining what our businesses do and the kind of valuations that we make and the growth prospects, I think actually, no, Africa is an inefficient market, but we all know that as an entrepreneur, you can take that inefficiencies and actually build your business. So I think in Africa there's a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of perception that it's very risky. But I think it's not deserved. So I think we need to prove the cases and show people, and then every day a new fund will come, right?
So from Africa to the world, you say, Joop. I love that.
You've met me already. The only thing I'll add is the disconnect. So in our business, we've been quite fortunate enough to travel the continent, basically spreading a very simple context for the founders in the ecosystem. And that is, look, the reality of capital is that it has to come from somewhere. And when someone gives you the capital, you must understand why they're giving it to you. It's not a feel-good factor. It's not about charity. It's not about an entitlement. There's an expectancy of return for that capital. The reason why I think in Africa there's this challenge is that our founders are not sufficiently prepared. We have challenges with education, which everybody is aware of. But beyond just the context of standard education, it's entrepreneurial education. And in that context, the right kind of information is not passing on. As a result, in the business development space, we've now created consultants and an ecosystem that's not delivering value and is not accountable to that value. As a result, you have founders and companies and SMEs who really are not investable, who really are not bankable, who really don't deserve capital. Okay? It may seem harsh to say, but the reality is, if an entrepreneur doesn't understand practically, why would someone give me even 10 rand?
As a venture capital company. I think maybe let me just preface my remarks by saying that capital is very very shy. It needs a lot of love, and when it doesn't get love, it moves away because there's always options, in the world. Now, when I look at our territory, which is Zimbabwe, you will be aware that Zimbabwe is a country that is essentially on a rebound after having gone through, a lot of decline, hyperinflation, and all sorts. And currently, the government is grappling with, trying to, get the policy framework to work again so that we retain competitiveness for the country, for us to be able to move, forward again. And as they do that, they're implementing fiscal measures as well as currency reform measures, which have resulted in, some short-term, dislocations. And as a result of that, we've experienced, very high inflation lately. The last I checked, I think we're hitting about 75%. And we also have created an environment that is not favorable to suppliers of capital. So we're probably missing on, the boom that you mentioned earlier. Now, with that sort of background, we're finding that whilst around us, there is probably a lot of venture capital, private equity activity taking place in a big way in Africa, we're probably losing out on those opportunities at the moment. Our government is talking positively, trying to reform the economy. We are not there yet, but as that happens, we found government and the private sector coming on board with alternative, funding instruments to support SMEs, to support startups, and to support special groups, women and the youth as well as the disabled. I think all in all, the Reserve Bank has made available facilities in the tune of more than 500 million, which sadly, when you actually then look at the uptake has actually been very low. And that speaks to, to a number of factors. The first being that these facilities are available to all the people that want them on the same terms as other commercial facilities that are on the market. People are expected to provide security, but also the absorption capacity within the the projects that are being promoted on the market is also very low. I think you spoke about being able to demonstrate to an investor or perhaps even a lender that a project is able to generate cash flows that can service the borrowing or that can give a return to an investor if it was capital. We find there is generally a gap in that regard. So a lot of people then tend to shy away from those facilities. They end up borrowing largely from the microfinance institutions. There is quite a lot of them that have emerged on the market. On aggregate, I think they've lent out more than $300 million, with 52% of that having been women that have access to those funds. There are limitations, obviously. When you're funding a project that has got a long incubation period, obviously microfinance with the punitive interest rates that obtain there is not your best option. But also the levels of funding that are available through that channel are very limited. I think at most you're probably looking at something like 20,000, which is not enough to fund most of the projects that obtain on the market. So that's the sort of landscape that we are operating in. Whilst there is a boom, I think territorial issues do come in and affect businesses that are looking for support. Thank you.
Thank you, Faniel. I'm going to now just summarize what I've heard. We've heard that we don't have enough funding that starts early and that goes slow. That is a problem that has been highlighted. Then another one that our panel said is the market, the people we must invest in is not always investment ready. So that skill, what does money mean? How do you make money more? That's an important part. And if the investment is not about return on investment, like venture capital, but it's an impact fund like Ivo's and yours, then the understanding that the money must convert into impact, and what does impact mean, that's important. Looking for passion. Pardon?
No, I'm saying they still want a return.
They want a return, but maybe a little bit smaller return. Maybe a little smaller return, but more impact. Okay? And of course, that concept of the social billionaire, I also want to put it out there. A lot of people are saying, why are you divorcing impact from profitability? Actually, you can be amazingly successful and have an amazing impact. So that is another debate that takes years to actually get right. The reality of capital, return on investment, and a lack of an understanding of it, the entrepreneurial capacity, not bankable, and then the ecosystem. I think you unpacked the ecosystem great for us, and also Mozambique, you did it. Where does the ecosystem fall flat? I can tell you in South Africa, that's got quite an advanced innovation ecosystem. We've got R&D tax incentives. We've got tech transfer offices, policy level. Yet, minute amount of money in that space. I've been running the Inventors Garage without support for almost 12 years. Because nobody wants to be pre-commercial and don't want to put significant money there. And if you don't put money there, how will you get your Series A investment? Anyhow, you can't just pluck and not put in, that's how the system works. So that understanding of an ecosystem we need to develop. I want to give the audience one or two statements or questions. I'm going to leave it to the audience. Do we have mics in the audience? There we've got ladies. There we've got one hand there. and maybe a second hand there at the back. So I'll take the two just to give you a chance, and then we'll go back to the panel.
Thank you, Lamini from Swatini. Thanks for the information about sources of money for projects and your willingness to give to entrepreneurs. But I have just a specific question, maybe to Vuisa and Mr. Jap. Yes, because you mentioned that in your companies you are not localized in your countries only. You can go to other countries. Like Jap, you mentioned 3 countries in Africa, and Vuisa, you mentioned a few countries in Africa. Is it just the 3 or those few that you mentioned, or any other country in Africa can get benefits from you?
Okay, thank you for that question. I'm just going to take the 2 questions and then go back to the panel to answer that. That's Vu and Joop. You must answer that question for us.
Good morning. Thank you, Audrey.
Hi, Irene.
Hi. So I'm Irene Ochem, and this is a topic that is really very close to me, being that I am the CEO of the Africa Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum. So I heard what you said about the disconnect, the entrepreneurs that we are training via accelerators for investment readiness. You finish and they're asking you, where is the money? And the investors are asking you, where is the pipeline? And who else is in the chain now? Is asking, how do I get the return? None of the panel members mentioned something I think is also a problem. Is it possible? Do you think that there is a problem with, in terms of Africa and the African ecosystem? Is there a problem with financing? The people that we are training, the startups, you have investors saying, if it's not, maybe the startups, they need 50,000 rand. But then the investors are saying, if it's not up to 10 million, it's not for me. So do you think that there is a pipeline of businesses that they are there, but the investors don't want them? So how do we address that challenge? Because it is there, they are there.
So thank you very much, Irene. I think you being from Nigeria and doing this Pan-African work, I think is amazing input. And that, I think, is an emerging paradigm, and I don't know who would like to answer that, because Vu and Joop, Carmen, can you, and maybe you comment on that, because that raises the issue, do we have a clear-cut African paradigm? So I traveled Nigeria up and down, and I was so impressed with those investors being in the companies, growing those companies. So, you bunch of hustlers there, right? It's so there, and it's that a competency. But then you go to other countries in Africa, and it's just not there. So do we have an African paradigm? How does it look? How does investment look in this continent? And it shouldn't be European investment. It shouldn't be Silicon Valley investment. How does our returns look like? Where do we start? So that, I think it's a complex issue, and I think that is an emerging paradigm that we can still co-create here and say, we don't want this, we want this. It should look like that, and we should own that. And I think that's very missing, and I think it's a hot topic. So let's start with the first question. Vu and Joop, can you answer that first question?
Yes, but I would like first to correct something about impact and finance. Because
okay, go for it.
I think impact investors are the most difficult investors that you can have. I'm the most difficult person here because I'm greedy. I'm greedy on finance, but I'm very, very greedy on impact as well. And I really think that if we want to unlock billions and billions for Africa and small entrepreneurs, I, as a fund manager, need to prove to the financial world that there is a financial return. So my impact is actually proving that that I can compete with those Silicon Valley investors for return. So I need to make financial return to make a meta impact, which is proving to other people that it is possible and other people will follow me. That is why I'm in this room, and that's why I won't give up on the financial return. That's very, very important. So we want both. To answer your question about the locations, we have a mandate to invest in the whole of Southern Africa. We have a focus on certain countries. It actually costs a lot to understand the legal system in every country, so I will not move easily in other countries. We are also, of course, we have a parent organization, which is the HIVOS Foundation. They have offices in the countries that we work with. So we have friends, so we have alliances. That's why I'm invited here. If you have a business that I cannot find somewhere else in any of the focus countries and it's a really good business case, we will consider it. But if I can find the same kind of business in our focus countries, we will choose them.
And then Wu, you must also...
Yeah, for us, I think, first of all, I think I'll premise my response by saying our kind of global view of the problem is that the continent's actually not quite ready just yet. I would say we need another 2 or 3 years before things will really heat up. So depending on the school of thought you come from, you might want to build up that momentum over the next 2 to 3 years, or you might want to sit back and wait for things to start happening and then jump on. We kind of are thinking that we're going to build up the momentum. And the idea that we've applied is that, for example, personally, I've traveled over 40 countries around the world. So not only in Africa, but again, parallel to other developing countries across the world, in South America and Southeast Asia and the Middle East. And it gives you a very interesting perspective of Africa itself. When you then apply that same principle, you begin to realize how far behind we are in the things that we need to get done first before we can actually have the kind of ecosystem that supports holistic advancement of innovation. The company itself, HIBA, has actively delivered entrepreneurship education in 8 countries in the last 9 months across the continent of Africa. I've just come back now from Malabo, Equatorial Guinea. Amazing stuff going on, a country of less than 1 million people. But again, far too early, so much to do. But at least there's a willing government, there's a willing ecosystem of partners, there's a willing corporate environment, but so many gaps to fill on policy, on tax programs, on everything. So the advantage of coming from South Africa, and again, unfortunately our politics in South Africa are very bad, so we don't recognize how good we have it. We have a lot of good things in this country. It's actually crazy how much good there is that we take for granted. And unfortunately, our politics makes it very difficult to operate. So the value that we see is everything I've learned over the last 9 years in South Africa, we are now sharing with the rest of the continent freely, and we're allowing different ecosystems to grow at the same pace. And the reality that, the premise that kind of comes to mind in terms of why we're doing that, is we believe that African ideas basically can spread across the continent, regardless of legal legislation, regardless of kind of core environment. But you need a supportive ecosystem to sustain a solution. So a practical example for you might be a water solution out of Lesotho. Some amazing water things happening in Lesotho, but yet that solution won't make its way to Cape Town, where there's a water crisis. Because the person sitting in Lesotho has no access of knowing what's going on in South Africa. The media is not working properly, the internet is not working properly, the general kind of opportunity to drive exchange and value creation where the idea is a key enabler doesn't work. We have a better relationship with our traditional colonial partners and trading partners in the West than we do with each other. So I think the reason why I've said 2 to 3 years is because a lot of that stuff is coming. So, and again, it also touches to some extent to some of Irene's questions. You know, is to say to everybody, look, there's a lot of things going on. I mean, it would take a whole lecture on a whole day to unpack all the opportunities that are coming up in the continent that are likely to directly and indirectly basically have the kind of impact that will see our ecosystem grow in massive leaps and bounds. So our core focus right now is in 3 countries. It's in Kenya, it's in Nigeria, and in South Africa, primarily because 74% of continental GDP is in these countries. So any effort outside of those countries, basically you're taking chances. You basically are taking a big chance. So that's currently where we are, but we know our objective and our view is that we want some kind of context of presence in every country across the continent. But it will take time.
Okay, I think that was a fair answer. Maybe from my side also to answer you. The Unicorn Fund that's Nigerian driven, that's going to, that is partnering with the Innovation Summit, has made us responsible for 13 SADC countries. They're looking for investable opportunities, and they're opening offices in Northeast and West Africa as well. But I think exactly the same thing that Wu says, it won't happen all in 1 year. It's a slow, there's something happening fast, but it's fast and slow. You know, it's going to happen, and we need to keep our eyes on the ball. I think it will definitely be totally pan-African soon. So now the African paradigm, Wu said something very important in his sentence that I loved, and he said, we work better with the UK, South Africa, than we work with each other. And that is nonsense. How do we, as this audience, overcome that? Because that's a market. If we think of SADC, we've got a market. Why must Rwanda still ask for a visa to enter South Africa? You know, so there's a few things that keeps us back. We're a block, we can be strong together. Why are we not that yet? So let's ask from an ecosystem perspective, Carmen, and then Fanuel and Aurora.
I really enjoyed the question around why is there this mismatch. I was trying to be very polite when I said that investors and entrepreneurs elude each other. It gives it a little bit of a romantic glow, but they don't. They actually repel each other. That's the reality.
Yes, let's be truthful here.
So as entrepreneurs, there's certain things, I love what you say, that we need to take responsibility for. Are we clear on our purpose? Are we clear on the impact that we want to give? And are we clear on how we're going to sustain this entity, not just for the 5 years, but for the next generation? We want to build sustainable enterprises. So as an entrepreneur, those are tough questions we need to grapple with. But as investors, we too have a responsibility, because we are using instruments that have given us the inequalities that we have today, and we think if we just slap in or add in a copy and paste and call it impact, that we've solved the problem. So there too, we've got to look at the instruments that we are using, at the philosophies, at the practices, and those too need innovation. So as much as we ask the entrepreneurs to bring the innovation to these intractable problems that we face as society, we too as investors and the sector need to bring innovation to redesign new instruments that will truly give us what we all want. And that is a lovely conversation to have as well.
That's a good one. Can we get an opinion from Zimbabwe? Your ecosystem, I think, was very valuable because it gives us a picture of what we're grappling with.
So when you talk about an African paradigm in the context of a capital conversation, I like to think of money as a universal concept. And in any event, most of the money that's actually financing projects in Africa comes from beyond our borders anyway. So I actually think that we just have to do the right things. We just have to open up. We just have to ensure that our projects are bankable. We just have to compete for capital with the guys that are sitting in India, for instance. We should not.
They're happy to partner, by the way.
Yes. So we should not think of ourselves as Africans, and therefore deserving special treatment as far as the flow of money is concerned. Because I don't think there is money that actually comes for free. Even when you look at impact investment, there is a return that is expected. When we say let's look east, perhaps we are paying a lot more in that context. What you were talking about, Vo, earlier on, the crowdfunding solutions that you actually implementing down here. These are concepts that have actually supported, the growth of SMEs in the developed world, in America, in Europe, go to Israel. These are concepts that are working there. And it's local money that is assisting the development of startups. why can it not be done? Why should we not have an apology about just borrowing such a concept and implementing? And we actually don't need too much intervention for some of these concepts. They are universal, and therefore we just have to play a game. Thanks.
I think the issue that we need more African investors and crowdfunding can help us bring that to the fore and grow that market, I think will be a game changer over the long run. Aurora from Mozambique.
Yes, what I noticed on our work is that most of the entrepreneurs are not ready to put their skin on their business. They want the money, but they don't want to risk. I saw in his presentation the class of the investors and the package that they are willing to put. If we who paid attention, the low tickets are most related with the national investors, family, corporations, DFIs. But even that kind of institutions will only put money if the idea have already been tested in the market, which means that you as entrepreneur, you have to go to the market, put your money, be ready to risk. After that, I believe that any can come and support. That's why the role of the national institutions like governments, innovation hubs are very crucial to really make the country attractive to...
Tell me, let's think about the 80-20 principle.
We can get more African founders to have that level of diligence and that mindset